Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending. My name is Heather Buck, and we are going to begin the Holiday Farm Fire update with land management. Thank you for those that were able to submit questions in advance. We'll have a couple of sections that we'll go through this evening. Before I start with that, I just want to make sure you all know that this is being recorded. So when you speak, that will come on and be recorded, but also we'll be able to post this later online and make sure that other people can hear the questions and answers as well. So we'll have three parts this evening. First is an overview and announcements from the land management staff. Then we will go to the questions that were previously submitted in advance, and Devin Ashbridge will moderate those questions. And we know that they'll go to different people, so different folks will pop on to be able to answer those for you. And then we will go to any live questions and answers. And Devin, again, will moderate that section as well. Again, my name is Heather Buck. I'm Lane County Commissioner for District 5, in which the Holiday Farm Fire encompasses. I'm going to pass it over for quick introductions from staff, and then we'll roll back to Keir to kick off announcements. So Keir, you want to start?
Sure. Thank you, Commissioner, and good evening, everybody. My name is Keir Miller. I'm the Land Management Division Manager, and I'm going to pass it over to Steve McGuire.
Hello, I'm Steve McGuire. I'm the building official for Lane County, and just want to let you know that I am having some technical difficulties with my laptop, so I may have to log off and log back on, and you may not be able to see me because I'm having some camera issues. So thank you for being here, and I'm glad to be here to answer your questions.
Amber, would you like to go next?
Thanks, Commissioner Buck. My name is Amber Bell. I'm the planning director for the county, and I'm happy to be here as well to answer questions that residents have this evening about rebuilding.
Hello, I'm Lindsay Eichner. I'm the principal planner. I also work in the planning program, and am excited to be able to help offer some answers to some questions that people have.
Thank you. So I'm going to toss it back over to Keir for announcements and an overview. And then we will go through some pre-asked questions. There are some that I will answer too, but I'm going to let our land management staff go first. I'll go offline. And then when those questions are addressed, I'll pop back on and answer some of those legislative questions or Board of Commissioner questions. Go ahead, Keir.
Great, thanks. So thanks again, everyone. We appreciate the opportunity to check in with y'all. We had a good and robust discussion upriver in person at the high school, and we do hope to be able to do that again soon, to meet in person. But this provides us another opportunity to try to answer some of the many questions that you have and share information. I want to just hit on a few highlights that are going on with the Land Management Division, with permitting, with the fee waivers, which the Board of Commissioners just approved last week, which I think most folks are probably aware of now, but I'll get into that. So we understand there continues to be a lot of questions about the permitting process. We understand the permitting process is complex, and that some folks are having a hard time getting answers to their questions, and we want to kind of hit the highlights, be able to hit the common themes that we're hearing a lot, and answer some specific questions that you've all provided us. So I first want to start off talking about the permit fee waivers that the Board of Commissioners has approved as of last Wednesday. That program, which will apply to all structures that were used as a primary or secondary or rental property, any kind of a dwelling that were lost in the fire, the county is now waiving building, sanitation, and associated land use permit fees. So what that means, if there was a structure that was previously used as a dwelling, as a lawfully established structure used as a dwelling, Permit fees will be waived. We will not collect fees for those applications that come in, and that'll be specific to the residential structure itself. It will not apply to if there's any associated structures such as, shops, barns, garages, detached garages. It's for the primary dwelling. And it also includes waivers on the septic fees that may be associated. And again, as I mentioned, any associated land use review. So there's typically a land use review as part of a application for a building permit. So those fees would be waived as well. And those include the preliminary types of approvals that a lot of folks are working through right now, the floodplain development permit, riparian declarations, those types of applications. A complete list of the specific planning permits that are waived is included online in the in staff's memo to the board from last Wednesday. So the permit waivers will be applicable for a 5-year period. They end on September 8th, 2025. So any permits that are submitted before then, we'll be waiving fees on. The fees are also retroactive. So we've already received a lot of applications from individuals. We will be providing reimbursements for those fees that we've received so far. There are 2 application forms which are on the McKenzie Rebuilds website. One is a waiver request form. So when you submit your permit application, it's a real simple 1-page form, name, address. Basically just want to verify that you were the original owner of the structure and yet you wish to have your permit fees waived. There are some individuals who may not want to take advantage of this program, so we want to be sure that we have that paperwork on file. And then if you've already paid for a permit, there is a a reimbursement request form as well. So you'd want to submit that and turn it in. We're currently still working through some of the back-end software issues with our permit waiver implementation, but it's fairly seamless for all of you. You shouldn't, it will probably take about a month to start issuing reimbursements for fees that have come in. But if you're coming in to submit a new permit, you won't have to pay any fees there. I should also mention that these waivers are for the original owner of the property that lost the structure. So in the deliberations with the Board of Commissioners, there was some discussion about should permit fee waivers be extended to individuals who may be moving in from out of the area to waive fees on those building permits. And the decision was that these waivers would be available for residents of the McKenzie Valley who lost the structure. And then in addition, there are, in some instances, we're aware folks who may, for circumstances, be choosing to leave or needing to sell their property or transfer their property to a relative. And in those instances, the waivers will also be applicable to any relatives. Happy to answer more questions about that if they come up, but I think I'm hitting all the highlights of the permit waiver program there. The other thing I want to mention is our customer service center. Obviously, our primary way of providing customer service and interacting with the public has been impacted by COVID-19. We've been closed for over a year with all of the vaccinations being made available in the community. Our target date is June 1 to reopen our customer service center. So we expect that is going to be very beneficial to a lot of folks trying to rebuild. We will be opening the customer service center initially on a reservation basis. So make an appointment and then we'll see folks, and we're prioritizing holiday farm fire survivors with those appointments. And then eventually we will be opening up the customer service center for drop-in service as well. There are a couple of questions that I just want to kind of highlight. We've had a lot of different folks ask about the removal of their foundations. We understand that, those are being cleaned up now, and there's concerns about if the foundation is removed, how can it be demonstrated to the county where the footprint of the structure was so it can be grandfathered in that same footprint? We understand that that's a concern for individuals. I want to try to put some of those, fears to rest. The county has a number of different sources that we can look at to determine, the foundation of a house. We have air photos. We have a technology called LiDAR, light detection and ranging, where there's actually been some very good imagery of the Mackenzie Valley flown. We have historical assessors records. We have building permit records. We feel pretty confident that probably 99% of all home footprints we can research and understand where they are through our documentation. However, we are encouraging folks that before the foundation is removed, that you take photographs of it. And it's best, there's some guidance that we're making available about how to do that. We're recommending that you take multiple photos of the foundation from different angles around your property. That way, in the very rare instance that we don't have good documentation about where the foundation of that structure was, we can have some evidence to document it to enable folks to rebuild in the original footprint of their structure. Let's see, the other question we're continuing to receive is regarding the Geotech permit requirements. Just want to reiterate that the county is still requiring the Geotech reports for individuals in moderate and high risk of geologic hazards. We are working with our folks in our mapping and GIS department to provide a better map so residents can look up their property and see specifically through the county web application where their property is located in regards to those geologic hazard areas. So that will be information that's going to be available through our Mackenzie Rebuilds website. Finally, just want to reiterate, most folks are probably aware that we have reopened the Leeburg office for appointments only. Again, this is only 1 day a week. It's on Thursdays with limited staffing right now. We're trying to focus having staff in the office to work through the building and land use permits that we're receiving. So as of right now, we have the office open on Thursdays. We do hope to be able to expand that soon. This past week, I think most folks are also aware the Board of Commissioners approved the creation of 6 new positions specifically for this work within the Land Management Division. Those positions have already been posted and we're recruiting for them. We'll take some time to train some of those positions, but we hope to get them filled and trained just as quickly as possible to be able to provide more opportunities for face-to-face assistance in the community. That's it for my introductory remarks, unless Amber, Steve, Lindsay, you had anything critical that I might have missed? No? Okay. Great. Well, we'll turn it over for, I guess, the Q&A.
Thank you, Kier. So we had a number of questions submitted in advance.
Kevin, did you want to try to queue that up?
Yes. Can you hear me, Kier?
We can hear you, or at least I can.
Yeah.
We had
Yes.
a number of questions submitted in advance, so we'll go through those.
I think you may be muted, Devin.
Here,
No,
we can
maybe I'm
hear her, but I think you can't hear her.
I'm muted, okay. Sorry about that.
I don't blame you for muting me, Kier. A lot of people wish they could. But we'll go through the questions submitted in advance first, and then I'll give instructions for all the folks here with us live tonight, how they can ask additional questions. But the first question that we received, and I believe this one is really for Lindsay, is from Perry. And Perry would like to know, they lost their home. It was on a parcel split between F1 and F2 zoning. The home was located on the F1 zoned portion. Can they rebuild on F1?
A great question, Perry. Yes, definitely. You can replace your rebuild in the F1 portion if that's where your previous home was located. I will apologize that on our website, we have an application form for replacement dwellings for Holiday Farm Fire destroyed homes specific to the F2 zone, but please use that form. You don't have to make any modifications to it. It's all of the same criteria. I'll work on getting that updated on our website, but please use the F2 form, even though your home was in the F1 portion. And the Fee for that, if you're curious, is $416.
Thank you, Lindsay. The next question is probably for Kier, and this is a question from James. James would like to know why there can't be a simple replacement form for folks that want to replace on the previous site in F2, floodplain, or riparian zones instead of such a long multi-page application.
Thanks. So yeah, that it's true. The application forms for some of these applications are extremely long, and I'd like to apologize for that and wish we could shorten them down and make them simpler. It seems a little ridiculous sometimes, the amount of information that's required and the questions that are asked. Honestly, the criteria for these replacement dwellings comes out of the Oregon revised statutes. This is information that we're required to look at, evaluate, and so we basically, there's information that we just need on these application forms to be able to qualify individuals for replacement. So I do apologize. I know they're lengthy. This is something that maybe we can get into a little bit later. The county's trying to work with some different groups to try to provide some resources for technical assistance and help with these application forms. You know, obviously we'd love to be able to spend the time to work with folks one-on-one, you know, being like kind of the guide as you fill out these applications. We can't always do that. We are trying to work with some individuals in the community that have some experience with the land development process, have some familiarity with these forms. And so there will be more information about that coming out as that program is established. In addition, the new permit navigator position that the county is recruiting for, that'll be one of the primary roles of that position, is to work with individuals who are having a hard time navigating these complex forms.
Thank you, Kier. The next question is for Steve, and I know Steve is having some issues with his webcam. Can you confirm, Steve, that you still have audio?
I think so. Can you hear me?
I can, thank you.
Okay.
So Lori would like to know if it's possible to have the emergency temporary dwelling or emergency RV permits auto-renewed. She got a letter telling her that her permit expires in May.
Lori, when we put together the temporary RV permits, we were looking at having the RVs connected to the septic system within 180 days. And that 180 days is the day at which it expires. And so when we issued those permits, we asked how the sewage was going to be taken care of, whether it's going to be with butts or whether it's going to be pumped, how is that working? And the idea is that having 180 days would give a person the opportunity to get their septic system cleaned and be able to hook up their RV to it. Now, we realize that that still is a challenge, and trying to take a look at that. Having it expire gives us an opportunity to talk to the folks that have RVs, again, revisit the issue of hooking into the septic system and revisit how they are taking care of the waste, the sewage from the RV. And so we will be extending those permits. There won't be any fees associated with it. It gives us the opportunity to have that discussion. It also gives us the opportunity to have the inspector, sanitation inspector, drive through the area and stop in at their convenience during, business hours when they're doing inspections for other systems, just to stop by to make sure everything is functioning the way it should be, that your bucks are being cleaned and that there isn't any sewage being on the ground or anything like that. And, based on regulations that should be connected to the septic system at this point, but we will, if it's not broken, we're not going to fix it kind of idea. So that if it is functioning with the bucks or with having the system pumped out, we will continue to do that for another 180 days and extend the permit at no fees. Another 180 days, it gets us an opportunity to revisit that with the people that have RVs. And so that conversation of how things are going, we feel is very important. It does require staff time. It does require a little bit of your time but I think it's just a step that's necessary to make sure that the environment up in the McKenzie area is being taken care of. There is another aspect I'd like to ask Lindsay or Amber to step in on, and that's if there's an RV in a floodplain or riparian area. So if you could weigh in on that, Lindsay or Amber.
I can chime in there, Steve. So I think similarly, with checking in with property owners about the operation of septic systems and disposal, there are some federally mandated standards for areas that are within the MAP floodplain that apply to RVs that are placed in the floodplain. There's some time limitations. So when we see that a RV is coming up for renewal, we'll be checking in with property owners about any applicable requirements there, but we're looking into options to extend and renew temporary emergency RVs as much as the federal law allows.
Thank you both. Our next question is for Keir. Linda would like to know if Lane County Land Management will be handling the erosion on the McKenzie River embankment.
Sure. I'd like to probably connect with you, Linda, to find out where specifically. Typically, the Land Management Division is not the agency involved with erosion. We generally work with the Watershed Council, the McKenzie River Trust, Eugene Water and Electric Board's often interested in this, and there are different programs available to help respond to that. If there is riprap proposed to prevent erosion, then land management may get involved with permitting for that, but that could also involve the State Department of Environmental Quality. So it can be complicated depending on where, if it's above ordinary high water mark or below ordinary high water mark. So I'm a little reluctant to give a one answer fits all. So if we could follow up and get a little bit more additional information, that'd be helpful. But generally, the Land Management Division doesn't have authority over erosion. There are some instances where we will work with landowners and again, those different agencies to try to promote some bank stabilization efforts. So happy to follow up with you more if we can identify a specific location.
Thank you, Keir. If Linda wanted to learn more about the watershed protection from some of our community partners outside of land management, that information is available at McKenzieRebuilds.org. We have a watershed section, and it talks a little bit and provides information about the Pure Water Partners, which is involves EWEB, McKenzie River Trust, and a lot of other folks working on those issues, not only along the McKenzie, but other waterways in the fire area. Our next question is also for you, Keir. Penny would like to know how folks obtain a fee waiver form, and is there a deadline to submit the waiver?
Yeah, so again, fee waiver forms are available on the McKenzie Rebuild site. The only deadline is once the program has sunsetted, September 8th, 2025. So 5 years from the date of the fire. So we will honor those reimbursement requests. If you've already paid permit fees and you submit for reimbursement, we'll honor those. Additionally, if you come in, in August 2025, want to submit for building permits, the program will still be available at that time.
Thank you. Lindsay, this question is for you. Hank has a LOMA from FEMA. Does he still need a floodplain permit?
So it really depends on how the LOMA was prepared and approved by FEMA. There's kind of two situations. So we would need to take a look at your specific LOMA to determine if you would need a floodplain permit or not. The two different situations are sometimes the LOMA calls a specific structure out of the floodplain. The other situation is sometimes the LOMA will call just a specific area on your property out of the floodplain. So if it's the first situation where it's the structure, then you would need to go through the LOMA process again. Hopefully it would not be as intensive as the first time you go through it because there's already survey information on the property. If it's the second where when the LOMA was completed, it was a specific description of area on your property that was called out and you're rebuilding in that same footprint, then you would not need any floodplain development permits. And if you would like any help taking a look at your LOMA, we would be happy to help you guide you through that process.
Thank you, Lindsay. Our next question is also for you from Janelle. She submitted an application for floodplain development, and she did receive an email response saying that her application had been processed, but it's unclear if that means that it is approved and if she can move forward. How do people know when a permit has been approved? And can you talk a little bit about how that review process works?
So we try to touch base with an applicant a couple different times. So we want to let you know when you're when we've received your application and we've processed your payment. That's one point. Now with the new fee waivers, that'll be a little bit different, but we'll still be contacting you to let you know that we've received your application and we're en route to process it. So I would definitely, I don't have a specific answer for your application because I'm not sure if it was contacted you to process the payment or it was the actual full application that was completed. Happy to follow up with you on that. The one thing I would say is typically if we complete the application, especially for a floodplain development permit for a new structure, we would either email you the approval or we would send you a paper copy or both. But we're trying to email some applications out if they're small and short enough to scan in and email out so you have it more quickly. So another place is we scan all of our completed applications to our website, to our software called, for short, we call it LMD Pro, but it's all of our property records. And so we can check there to see if it's actually completed. And then so those are kind of the different places to know if they were actually done. You're going to receive paperwork. So if it was just called a day or two ago, you may just wait a couple days in the mail to see if you receive anything. If not, give us a call.
Thank you. Our next set of questions is for Amber. These questions are from Walter. He's lost his home, a detached garage, and a shop in the fire. The original building permit indicated the finished floor was to be built 20 feet above the low water mark, and the house was set back from the river by about 127 feet. So a few of his questions. The first is, what is the process if he's interested in rebuilding the garage with an apartment above? Are there restrictions that he needs to pay attention to?
So rebuilding the garage with an apartment above, if it is in the rural residential zone, there is an allowance for one dwelling per lot or parcel. So an apartment could qualify as a dwelling. The zone also allows a garage, and so both of those uses would be allowed. There is not an allowance for two dwellings. There is an allowance for one guest house, but a single garage with an apartment above it would be something that's allowed in the zone.
Walter had a similar question about the pole barn. It was a two-story building. There's possibility of rebuilding that and creating an apartment on the second story. Do the restrictions differ from what you just said?
Not substantially. The zone, again, it allows one single family dwelling, it allows accessory structures, and it allows guest houses. So you can have a garage, you could have a pole barn, you could have one apartment, and that could qualify as a dwelling. And you could have one guest house, which cannot be occupied by, can't be rented out, it can be occupied only by guests, non-paying persons. And it can't have a kitchen or an address. So that's an option, but again, just one single family dwelling, or that, which could be an apartment. And then of course it would need to meet setbacks and would need to go through the permitting process.
Can you elaborate on what it means when we talk about the footprint of a building?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good question. It means the impact area of a structure. Oftentimes that's the foundation. It could also mean some overhangs like cantilevered areas, or other areas that are covered, that extend from the walls of the house or a structure.
Thank you. We have two more questions from Walter. If he wanted to rebuild using the same foundation location as far as distance from the river, but extend the home, the length of the home from side to side, is that permissible where he's at?
So in looking up this address, and I understand that Walter's indicated, that you've indicated that this structure or the house was about 127 feet from the river. So when we talk about needing to rebuild on the same footprint or foundation, we're talking about areas that, or structures that were built lawfully but do not meet today's setbacks or the riparian area setback. And so if the structure is, or dwelling is outside of the riparian setback, then you can expand on it. As long as you're meeting property line setbacks, you can build outside of the existing footprint on either side, provided it meets the 10-foot property line setback for the rural residential zone, as well as the road setback, which is 20 feet, generally speaking. There may be some additional setbacks from Good Pasture Road. We are happy to look that up and follow up with you to let you know what specifically applies. But as long as a dwelling or structure is not in the riparian area setback or another setback that would make it non-conforming or grandfathered in, and you can meet today's setbacks, then you can expand a structure.
Thank you, Amber. And that actually answers his final question as well. So we'll go ahead and move on. We have a couple of questions from Randy. The first one for you, Amber, is do we plan to allow rebuilding on former foundation locations if the structure was grandfathered in from setback and similar requirements? If so, will there be requirements for consent by neighboring property owners or additional applications for variances and easement recordings?
Good questions. So I can't speak to using the same foundation in as much as is that allowed under a building permit, but with regards to the former foundation location, yes, if there's evidence that a dwelling was constructed lawfully and does not meet today's setbacks or planning requirements, it can be replaced within the time period allowed by state law, which depends on zoning. Some of the zones allow for a replacement dwelling, like the forest zones allow for a replacement dwelling of a dwelling that previously existed that was burned per the LCDC emergency rules, with as long as those rules are applicable or are active. So at this time, the LCDC temporary rules are active through May 8th, though we're anticipating that they're going to hopefully renew them. No guarantees, but we hope that they approve permanent rules on May 20th. Otherwise, if the foundation was, if the structure existed lawfully and does not meet today's setbacks or planning requirements, state law allows for replacement of the use or the structure within 1 year. That comes out of ORS Chapter 215. We hope that that's extended. There are a few different bills at the legislature that would extend that time period through September 30th, 2025. And so if that is the case, then that will allow for a longer period of time. And with regards to written consent by neighboring owners, I don't believe that's a requirement. Some applications require public notice to adjacent properties. It doesn't require consent from neighboring owners, but it does provide them with the opportunity to comment on criteria that are part of the application. I hope that answered that part of the question.
Randy's next question, you did speak a little bit to it, but is there statutory relief for fire reconstruction beyond what you already mentioned in your previous answer? Is there anything else?
Yeah, it's those three main bills I'm aware of, Senate Bill 405 and 465 and House Bill 2289. The Senate bills would extend the 1 year replacement or restoration 1 year timeline. And House Bill 2289 provides for a path rebuilding for structures that were permitted already, approved by a planning application already, and or they predated zoning. And again, no guarantees, but we're hopeful that those bills are passed. And there are some other criteria that apply, but that's the general gist of those bills. I'm also aware that the Department of Land Conservation and Development Commission, DLCD, Department of Land Conservation and Development, that they are working to propose permanent rules to the Department of Land Conservation and Development Commission, LCDC, and that would include some allowances for sheltering and interim housing to support rebuilding following the wildfire.
Thank you. And Randy's final question is for Kier. How long will it take for the county to process building permit applications submitted in 2 months, or earlier? And if they are complete and no other permits are needed, what's the timeline?
Yeah, so we've been looking at this closely. Once building permits are received and they are complete, meaning you don't need like any preliminary permits like a floodplain development permit or a riparian permit, something like that. If it's just, you've submitted a permit for a building and it's a complete set of plans, we are issuing those consistently in 2 to 3 weeks. So right now, that is not where the lag is on the permitting process. Right now, the lag, and I mentioned this before, really is in the submittal piece. In the past, when our customer service center was open, we could spend a lot of time talking with folks over the counter, giving them all of the forms, making sure that all of the information for a complete submittal was in hand. Now we've been sort of working over the phone and over email. It's less efficient. So we're getting a lot of application submittals that unfortunately don't have everything that we need. We're trying to put clear resources out there online and explain what the submittal requirements are. So when we do get a complete application in, we can turn it around just as quickly as possible. And right now we are, again, seeing really good turnaround, 2 to 3 weeks with a complete submittal.
Thank you. Kier, I believe we put your name to the next question as well. Pedro asks if there are unusual increases in crimes since the fire in the area, and is it safe for RVs to be there?
Yeah, so I would probably want to defer this to the sheriff's office. I think maybe we have heard anecdotally of, there's definitely activity out there, folks, especially shortly after the fire, kind of snooping around, some trespass issues. But to be honest, the Land Management Division, this really is in our bailiwick. We could certainly refer the question to the Sheriff's Office for the most up-to-date information. I know that patrols have increased out in that area since the fire.
I have heard Deputy Olson, who is one of the dedicated deputies to that area, talk about that after that initial increase after the fires, people started to return upriver. That, the folks that live upriver, you all know who's who maybe isn't the best neighbor, and who should be where and who shouldn't be. And so there are plenty of community members working with the Sheriff's Office to help them keep track of bad actors in that area. But I've also heard him mention specifically that for some property owners that have had issues, the use of trail cams has been very, very helpful in helping to resolve those issues. And I know that Deputy Olson has made the offer before that if a landowner purchases trail cams, they need help placing them or want to talk about where might be the best place to put them on their property, to flag one of those resident deputies down, and they are happy to help. There is no perfect answer, but certainly they work a lot with community members upriver, and the strong sense of community that folks have does a lot to deter some of those more unfortunate consequences. The next question is also for you, Kier. It's from Jerry. Are the geotechnical surveys being waived, or can people submit them after they drop off their plans to get permits?
Yeah, so as I mentioned in the opening remarks, that's not something that the county has latitude to waive. We've looked into this question. We've looked at the requirements in the building code, so we can't waive those. We also don't charge a fee for that, so it's not something that a fee that the board would have waived. The cost for folks who are rebuilding is with a private engineer to produce that document. We do understand those can be expensive, and unfortunately it's just not something that the county is able to waive. And frankly, for reasons we've discussed before, those reports can be important in helping mitigate future losses in the event of some kind of a seismic event. So to answer the second part of the question, can building permits be submitted and then the geotech report come later? Because we do understand there's a lag. Sometimes it's taking a while for folks to be able to get those reports in. I'll just say a couple of thoughts, and then I'm sure Steve will want to weigh in on this. I know that the geotech reports will often prescribe the type of development foundation construction that needs to occur. So if there are geologic hazards on site, there may be some changes in the foundation, a deeper, gravel pad, or different ways that the foundation and, the structure is built. So I would be cautious about turning in a complete set of, plans. You may have purchased engineered plans or something like that, and then have the geotech report come back and say, no, actually something different is required in the design. So Steve, do you have any other thoughts on that you want to provide?
Thank you, Kier. Yes, there was a while back, several months ago, we said, okay, let's try to take these in so we can get some of the billing review process without the geotech report, and with the expectation that the geotechnical report would be available before we started our review. Based on our time turnarounds, those weren't being produced. We ended up having to put projects on hold. It ended up causing the permit process to be delayed as far as the billing review process, looking at additional time to review those projects and additional costs to review those projects, with additional information coming in afterwards, and taking a look at the load transfers all the way to the foundation, how that would affect the design, perhaps over excavation as far as depth for the foundation, coming in with gravel and developing compacted gravel structural fill under that. So it really just, you're going to be waiting for the geotechnical reports. It really just bogs up the plan review process if that isn't submitted upfront prior to the building permit review process. So we have been asking for that upfront.
Thank you. We had a handful of questions submitted that maybe Commissioner Buck could help address. The first one of those, we actually got this question from both Melanie and Janice, and it is there anything in the works for creating a permit fee waiver program or discounts for commercial properties?
Thank you. I've been asked that, and right now, not at this time. We're really trying to work on implementing the fee waivers for the residential section and getting those new staff members up to speed. But I know it's critical to get our businesses back up and running as well. So I'll be in touch with other commissioners around the state and how they're working this same issue in their areas. And hopefully we'll have more information on how that is going. But for now, we're just going to be implementing the residential fee waivers at the moment. So stay tuned. We'll see what happens.
Thank you. The other question submitted that you might be able to provide some information on came from Leanne, Meredith, and Belinda. They're wanting to know, where is the legislature at with the proposed bills Amber spoke to on extending that 1-year requirement to rebuild for non-conforming properties? And is there a deadline by which the legislature has to make that decision?
So there is movement on several different legislative items. I'm sorry, I'm right in the sunshine and it may be hard to see me, but there are several dozen actual bills regarding wildfire recovery that we're watching. The timeline one, specifically the 12-month timeline issue, is Senate Bill 405, and it did pass the Senate. It is now in the House, awaiting approval in the House. And the other one that was talked about earlier is House Bill 2289, and that is a really big all-encompassing type of wildfire bill that I've been testifying for. I would be surprised if other wildfire bills wrap up into that bill. There's Senate Bill 762, also testified on that, and that's regarding wildfire prevention efforts, and specifically with public utilities and wildfire protection plans in conjunction with the local fire authorities. All these seem to have very good support. And the last one I wanted to mention was Senate Bill 745, which is helpful for creating a sanitary district. And that did pass the Senate as well, and I'm waiting to see its next step. I think that will go to the House next, but I'm awaiting that. So there are several its. It may take a while to get feedback on all of them, but it's not a done deal until both the House and the Senate pass them and the governor signs them. So I could imagine they're pretty meaty items, and it may take till the end of the legislative session before we get a full response.
Thank you. Our next question is for Keir. Well, it's not fair if you all turn your cameras off. This question comes from Peter. Will Lane County extend fee waivers to people who lost a home in the fire that they were renting, but now they are returning to rebuild in the fire area?
So currently the fee waiver program is applicable to individuals that lost a dwelling. So if you were renting prior and the property you were living in was lost, but it wasn't your property that you owned, we're not providing waivers for new development. It's for replacement of lost structures. So if I understand the question correctly, if you're wishing to build a new structure that wasn't previously lost, then the waiver for rebuilding would not apply.
Thank you, Keir. The next question is for Steve, and this comes from Bob. Will building occupancy permits be granted to property owners who have hazardous trees on their property?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because when I take a look at hazardous trees, that's more an issue of compliance and trying to deal with the hazardous situation. When we take a look at building permits, we're looking at the proposal for the building, the foundation, and we're not always aware of what the conditions are on the site. There would be some requirements for OSHA standards as far as safe working environments that may be applicable, and I think some common sense. Why would you be having people on your property when there's a high level of risk because of hazardous trees? Certainly with an occupancy, trying to issue a certificate of occupancy, we're going to be looking at the building code requirements, and the building code does not specifically address hazardous trees. So I think that more than anything, it could be something that would need to be followed up with code compliance as far as that hazard to public, and also as far as it's not a building code issue. So I think code compliance would be the most logical place to follow up with that. And I don't know, I think that addresses it, or I hope so.
Thank you, Steve. Also, for property owners who are participating in the state's cleanup efforts, if you've signed an ROE, then that includes hazardous tree removal for hazard trees that may be a danger to the cleanup crews, including in and around the footprint of the dwelling or the other buildings that were lost. So that is something to consider if you're participating in that program. If you haven't signed up for an ROE, but you're interested, it is still available to people, and you can find out more by calling the state's hotline at 503-934-1700. Our final question that was submitted ahead of time is up next, and then we'll get to live questions from the folks that are here with us tonight. But this question is for Amber, and it's from John. He lost a pole barn, shop, and shed in the fire. The shop was built in 2010, but since it was built, the floodplain map has changed, and now his original and usable concrete foundation is within a few inches of the new floodplain line. He's trying to get a variance to allow him to start building. That's taken quite a while. Could you speak more to that process, especially for other property owners who may be seeing similar things?
Sure. So John, I'm guessing what's going on here is if there's a structure that's really close to the floodplain, we require floodplain verification. If a property owner wants to contest that the structure is in the floodplain and have us review the floodplain maps to determine it's actually outside of the floodplain and is therefore not subject to a floodplain development permit requirement and complying with the floodplain regulations. So that's an option. Or if it looks like if the structure is truly in the floodplain, then the floodplain development permit will be required. So it might be a way to avoid those requirements and determine that it is in fact outside of the floodplain boundary. In some cases, we might be able to rely on past permits if a structure was built in 2010. So I'd be happy to take a look into that. I'm sorry to hear that it has taken you 4 months. If that's just for the floodplain permit, we're really we're striving to prioritize anything related to the Holiday Farm fire. And so please do feel free to reach out to myself, and I'll take a look into the permit and questions about your floodplain boundary and what applications required for your reconstructing the shop.
Thank you, Amber. So we've covered all of the questions that people sent in ahead of time. I know there are more questions out there. So for all of the attendees, what we'll do now is answer your questions one at a time. You should have an icon that allows you to raise your hand. Just click it once, it toggles on and off. So if you click it twice, you might put your hand back down. I will go through and begin introducing people. I will unmute you so that you can ask your questions, but you'll also have to make sure that you're unmuted on whatever device you're using to log into the meeting. If any of you have participated in public comment for the Board of Commissioners in the last year, it's how they're doing that as well. So I will go through first, and the first hand I saw come up was from John Farkas. So let me unmute you, John, and then you'll be able to ask your question. You are self-muted, John.
Okay, can you hear me now?
We can, thank you.
Okay. Well, I am the one who's the question you read, the last question you read. I did submit the floodplain verification request, paid the $623, and that was weeks ago. I still haven't heard, and because it's such a tiny, according to my contractor, it's such a tiny incursion into the new floodplain. I was just begging for a variance. I'm at 845 Good Pasture Road. The permit is 509-PA21-05248. As I said, I'm 84 years old. My shelf life is kind of limited at this point. I need to have a left ankle total joint replacement, which is going to happen in June 17th, was postponed from last October. I will have an 8-week recovery where I can't be on my feet. So time for me is really an essence, and this fully equipped shop was my retirement life dream, and everything is gone. I was hoping there's some compassion that if it's really just a few inches, they will allow me to rebuild on the existing and engineeringly approved foundation. I turned in everything. My contractor apparently turned everything in that is required, and I just haven't heard from anybody. And incidentally, the waterway that is in question is a seasonal creek that is dry from the end of April till November. At the very highest level during a very wet winter, it never even broached its own bank, and its bank is about 4 feet below the level of the foundation and the adjacent field. So I'm really hoping that somebody will be kind enough and just give me a waiver and let me go ahead. My insurance company also has a deadline for me to rebuy equipment for the shop, which is the 26th of October. And I have no place to put anything. So again, I'm just asking for some compassion and some support from maybe Embers, the group, or Kiers to let this go by. If it was there before, it was fully permitted in 2010. I don't really know how much it goes into the new riparian zone, but according to the contractor, it's merely inches. So would one of you be kind enough to help me? As I said, I don't have that much time being 85. This was my life's dream, and everything I owned other than clothing and toothpaste, what have you, everything was in that pole barn. It's a pole barn with an open shed area for my burned up tractor and lawnmower. Am I asking too much? I don't know. I know being on a dwelling, I am way in the back of the line. But this has gone pretty close to 4 months. So could you please someone try to help me? And that's all I can hope for.
Sure, we'll certainly look into that. I took down the details, and I did just have a chance to look up the permit. It looks like it was submitted back on March 16th, so just coming up on 1 month. So that are with these type 1 land use application permits, just so you're aware, our typical non-COVID, non-holiday farm fire turnaround time is usually like 2 months, 8 weeks. we're trying to process these quicker. We're coming up on the 4-week mark, so I would expect any day now that we're going to have some information coming your way on this floodplain verification. So thanks for sharing that. Thanks for the information. We will be reaching out soon.
Thank you, Kier. I don't see any other hands raised, but I do see where Mindy Brock had typed a question. Mindy, I'd like to go ahead and unmute you and let you just ask that so that everyone can hear. Okay, Mindy, you are self-muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Perfect. So I'm just curious, we have had a geotech report and everything done on our property, and we are just waiting for the final engineering for our permit. How long will that take? And once it's submitted, I think you already answered this, but I'd like to hear it again.
Sure. Yeah. So it sounds like you have everything ready to submit. You're just waiting for the final engineering. And I want to have Steve's take on this. Steve, with engineering, I know we're doing the quick start, but that typically requires engineering to be part of the quick start. Are there any options to start review without engineering right now? Any thoughts on that? Are we pretty much?
Really, the engineering is a key part of our review, taking a look at the load transfer, starting with the roof trusses or roof framing, going all the way down to the foundation.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I want to find out more about your project is if you've had that submitted for a preliminary review to see if there's any additional information you need, or if you're just putting this stuff together and putting it into our office for the first time.
We would be submitting for the first time.
Okay. So when you're doing that, our staff is going to look at that, and they're going to look at from perspective of, are there any planning issues, any issues around sanitation? Are the site plans able to show what's happening? Do we have all the drawings that we need to submit for the complete building review? So that's going to be the first step that happens, starting with planning. That can go fairly quickly. It can also take a fair amount of time if there's pieces that need to be followed up with. But once that gets to that point of that pre-submittal review and goes to the building permit review, where we're actually getting ready to process the building permit, do that review, that review is taking 2 to 3 weeks. And that also may end up with some questions that we may ask the engineer or the designer for clarifications on. But typically it goes through very smooth at that point.
Excellent. That's good to hear. Thank you.
Yeah, and I might just add this advice for others too. If you feel you're very complete with the application and you're just missing like your engineering, for example, we want to see complete applications come through the door. That's ideal. It's really hard to go back and forth when there's lots of different pieces of information that are missing. But if there's one thing like a geotech report or again, geotech report is probably good to have that well squared away ahead of time. But if you're just waiting on the final engineering to come in, getting the application in the door so we can take a look and highlight anything else that might be missing is probably a good idea. I've had a lot of folks tell me like, hey, I'm ready to go. My developer's on top of it. I have everything I need. I'm going to drop it off tomorrow. I'll expect this permit in 3 weeks. I mean, basically people have told me that, and that's great. We get the application in and, X, Y, and Z is actually missing. So it's good even if you think you've got everything, you're just waiting on this one piece, you might as well get it in here and let us take a look at it and start working on it. Just save any delays down the road.
Thanks, Kier. I see that Randy Turnbow has raised his hand. So Randy, give me just a second and I'm going to unmute you. Looks like you're self-muted, Randy. Go ahead, Randy. So it shows that you're unmuted. We can't hear you. I'm going to go ahead and move to the next question, and then we'll try again in a second and see if maybe there's a setting on your end. So Walter Wilson has raised his hand. Walter, give me just a second and I will unmute you. There you go, Walter.
Okay, thank you very much. Just a quick question here about setback from property lines. Did I hear 10 feet was the setback?
Walter, it depends on the zoning. So for the rural residential zone, most properties are subject to a 10-foot property line setback. In some limited cases, there's a 5-foot setback, but that's for properties that are smaller than 1 acre and that existed prior to 1984. And again, that's the rural residential zone. But for most rural residentially zoned properties, it's 10 feet. And then there's a 20-foot setback from the road. And then there's a road setback that we need to factor into that we can only measure once we know a specific address and can measure the road dimensions, because there's a planned right-of-way distance that affects where that 20-foot front yard setback starts. So if you have a specific property, we'd be happy to take a look at the specific setbacks that apply. It's somewhat property specific.
Yes, the address there is 46161 Good Pasture Road. And the property itself, the land is less than 1 acre. And the house was built in 1976, I believe. So we would be looking at a 5-foot setback from the property lines.
So for the eastern property line and western property line, if the property predates, and we normally need to do a little bit of research to verify this, if the property predates 1984 and it's less than 1 acre, then it would be a 5-foot side yard setback. There's the riparian area setback that applies from the river. And then we would need to do a little bit of research. And I'm happy to look into this and follow up with you to let you know the specific road setback that applies. It involves a little bit of a calculation.
Thank you very much. I understand that. The house is also elevated at least 20 to 25 feet above the river itself, setting up on a bank. So that's just my questions on there. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Amber, I will share Mr. Wilson's email address with you after so that you can do that follow-up. I see that Melanie Stanley had also submitted a question in writing. Melanie, I'll go ahead and unmute you, and why don't you go ahead and ask your question so that we can all hear.
Okay, can you get an RV permit extended on a property that there isn't a plan in place yet for rebuild or that hasn't been submitted yet?
Yeah, so temporary emergency RV placements, we are, if there was a property where a home was lost, but they're not ready to submit for plans yet, yeah, we are providing that opportunity. As Steve mentioned earlier, we are renewing those. They're good for 180 days. So that is a possibility.
Okay, thank you.
And Randy Turnbow will try this again. If we still can't get your audio working, and this goes for anyone else, please feel free to throw some questions in the chat as well, and we can answer them that way too. So Randy, I'm going to try unmuting you again. Randy, I'm showing that you're unmuted, but we still aren't able to hear you. I also don't hear any feedback. Let's go ahead and see if you can type your questions in the chat, and I'll make sure that they get asked tonight. Sorry about that. Pedro Gonzalez, I will mute you next so that you can ask your question. And it looks like you are self-muted, Pedro.
Who's going now?
We can hear
You
you.
hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I was concerned about the boundaries, I know they were going to do some survey again. And because, we don't know really where the boundaries of the properties are at this point in time. Do they have markers over there for the boundaries? For the property?
Pedro, I'm sorry, are you talking about the boundaries for your specific property, your property?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay.
Because
So,
I'm sorry, my question is based on that. I was concerned whether I should go ahead and put a fence, so I have my property, just that nothing else will be affected when the construction starts, and I can put things there without people going over, helping themselves or whatever.
Sure. Unfortunately, the county, we do have survey crews out there reestablishing monuments. So the main, kind of, icons out in the valley that were lost in the fire, so people can, reestablish, basic surveying, kind of the grid work out there. But individual properties, the county does not provide surveying. I mean, that would be super labor intensive to survey every property out there and try to reestablish markers. Typically, when there's questions around property boundaries, we always refer individuals to work with a private surveyor if there's any question about the property boundaries. We have maps, we have tax maps on file at the county, but these are not survey documents, and they can't give you an exact location of the property boundary. That's something you would need to work with a private surveyor to establish.
Okay, may I follow up with the next one? So knowing that now, once I take care of the surveying and I know my boundaries, can I go ahead and build the fence all around it? So I will be isolated from everything else.
Sure. So yeah, I mean, a fence is an allowable use on a property. You can build a fence. There are certain height requirements. There's, if it's within the setback areas. Lindsay, Amber, do you want to talk some more specifics on that?
I can help answer some of those. I think there's setbacks to the road, and so there's some requirements that if it's within the front yard setback, that it needs to be tiered down to a little bit lower level, and then near your driveway, we need it even a little bit lower for clear vision for vehicles coming in and out of the property. But we have a really nice fence handout on our website. I'm happy to email that to you. We can get your contact information from Devin and email that to you, so you have all of that information. There's a really nice little diagram helping explain that of what our roads department rules and regulations are for fences near the right of way. Because I would hate for you to build that and then have issues later down the road. There's also some allowances for building a little bit taller fences. Just depends on the type of fence. So we can definitely follow up with you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lindsay. I'll make sure that you get his email as well. We had a question submitted in writing by Janelle Connor. Janelle, I'd like, if we can, to have you go ahead and ask that question directly. So I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. Go ahead, Janelle.
Can you hear me? All right. Okay. I just want to, so when we start the permit process, are we going to be assigned, like, I don't want like a case manager, but are we going to be assigned to one person so we don't have, to go through 3 or 4 different people to try to get the same information? Would we just have like one point of contact kind of going forward?
Yeah. So that is the strategy we're trying to implement here. We've got, when the permit comes in, we assign it, basically a coordinator, and that person will be the point of contact while it's in the initial intake review, while we're making sure that we have a complete submittal package. Obviously, at some point, it requires some additional expertise from like one of our plans examiners. They will look at the permit, but at that point, it's, you're typically well in the door. We've gotten all of the preliminary, or we really are trying to limit that multiple points of contact. So you'll have one primary permit coordinator up front, and then it will be processed by our plans examiner.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it.
So I do not see any other raised hands. I don't see any questions in the chat or the questions box. Oh, Doug, thank you for raising your hand. We don't want to miss anybody tonight, so I'm going to unmute you. It looks like you're self-muted, Doug.
Sorry, too used to Zoom. Having the controls in other places. I was looking around on the McKinsey Rebuilds website earlier today, trying to put together the materials needed for the wastewater septic permit. And I read, because where I read somewhere where there were examples of a plot plan. Just because I've drawn one out, but I want to your point, submit proper information. So in that, a lot of us homeowners are new to this experience of providing plot plans for permitting. Are there any examples that you do have on your website?
We do, yeah. We have a handout, again, a pretty nice handout, a plot plan, site plan submittal guide, and that should be on our McKinsey Rebuilds website. We'll double check and make sure it's there. If it's not, it's definitely on our land management website. And then in addition to that, that provides a really good example on it and lists all the information that's needed. If that's not helpful enough, we do have, scores, hundreds, probably thousands of site plans on file here that have passed spec, and we'd be happy to work with you to find some other templates as well.
If it's not on the website, that's my fault, and I'll fix that tomorrow and also send you a link.
Oh, well, thank you very much. Appreciate your time tonight.
I'll just add really quickly to our planner on duty. We're able to print out a scaled 11 by 17 printout of the parcel. So that's something that we customarily provide to help applicants prepare their site plan.
Thank you. We have a raised hand from Lori Valentine. Lori, I'm going to unmute you. Lori, it looks like you're unmuted, but we haven't heard anything yet. Go ahead and try again, Lori. It looks like you're unmuted. Is it possible, Lori, for you to type your question in the chat box? It looks like you might be having some technical difficulties, and I'm honestly not sure how to help you troubleshoot from your end. I'm sorry. Okay, I'm not seeing any other raised hands or questions in the chat box. Looks like Randy was able to submit his question in writing. Will you please comment on formerly grandfathered in setback problems if I rebuild on the same line and the neighbors consent? He has a 50-foot lot. And if you need a refresher here, Randy had submitted some questions in advance. It doesn't look like it included the address. I'm sorry.
Could you repeat that again, please, David?
Will you please comment on formerly grandfathered in setback problems so that if Mr. Turnbow rebuilds on the same line and the neighbor's consent, he has a 50-foot lot? I'm gonna try to unmute Mr. Turnbow again and see if it works better this time. Randy, are you able to talk to us? Technology will be the death of me. Looks like you're unmuted, Randy. Randy, why don't you submit your address to us if you can? If you don't feel comfortable typing that in here, you can submit it to public information at lanecountyor.gov, and then we can follow up with you with some more specific information. Lori was able to type her question in. If the Geotech report says recommended, does that mean must?
Steve, I'm going to let you answer that one. I don't typically decipher those Geotech reports.
I'm muting myself. We're looking at a geotechnical engineer who's making recommendations for the foundation. And if you're going to be doing something different than that, we'd be looking for a different recommendation. So it's pretty much a must do that, but you can go to a different engineer and perhaps get a different report.
So when they say recommended, that's their solution to the hazard on site, and a different engineer might have a different solution, is what you're saying.
That's right. So we're going to follow the recommendations of someone with better knowledge about the soils than we have, and would want the engineer for the building to do the same thing. If the engineer is going to follow some other recommendation, then we want to see that geotechnical report with that other recommendation. And a lot of times they do make their recommendations as far as the foundation, but what are the alternatives? And so we can look at that from, having you go out and get another geotechnical report in hoping that the next engineer geologist would provide you with a different recommendation. So we do follow those recommendations.
She followed up to clarify that she has a survey, but it's a preliminary report. Does it have to be finalized, or can it still be preliminary? It's the inches of gravel that the geotech report has, but the engineer does not say that has to be done.
I would want a final report. I wouldn't be able to issue a permit with just a preliminary. And if the engineer and the geotech are in disagreement, that would be for them to resolve. And I'd be looking at the recommendation as far as the person who has actually gone out and done the soil survey.
Thank you, Steve. I see that Melanie has raised her hand. Melanie, let me just unmute you real quick.
Thank you, Devin. So the property that that we own is a commercial residential property, and it originally had a store on the front and a house on the back piece of the property. We are looking to expand the house because it was barely a legal dwelling. It was kind of small anyway, but we're concerned that the septic system won't be considered of legal size to be able, because both buildings shared the septic. So we are concerned that the septic system won't be considered legal for both new dwellings if the house is bigger. Is there any way, without doing like a full site visit and paying a bunch of extra fees and everything like that, is there just like a this is what's required per square footage of building, or something like that that you guys can provide? Or do I have to go through all of the like site visits and everything else before we can determine that?
So we're currently waiving those sanitation fees. So if the question is, you know, what's the appropriate size, you know, if you're expanding what was there before, you're adding additional, burden on the system and you want to have it sized appropriately, we are, as part of the fee waiver program, any of the initial site inspection for the sanitation install, there would not be fees for that.
Even though it's a commercial residential, sorry.
Well, was there a residence there prior, right? You were using it as a residence, okay, and it was permitted as a residence?
Correct.
Okay, so the fee waiver program that was adopted doesn't specify the zoning. There are instances where there were permitted residential dwellings that might be in a zone other than the residential zone, and the waivers would apply to those as well. The goal here is to be able to help subsidize the replacement of lost dwellings. And as far as the commercial business, though, if there's any replacement in the commercial building, that would not be covered through the waiver program.
Right, and that's fine. So, okay, perfect. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I had a question on that, Melanie. In rebuilding the house, are you adding more bedrooms?
We are adding 1 bedroom and a bathroom.
Okay, because the size of the septic tank is going to be based on the number of bedrooms. But then if you're tying in the commercial, we'd have to take a look at that as well. But since you are increasing the number of bedrooms, we would need to take a look at that. And as Kira was saying, there are waivers for that residential use as part of the building.
Okay, that makes sense.
Okay.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, Melanie, I was a little too quick to click that. I do not see additional questions or hands raised. I know that we'll follow up with Mr. Turnbow separately and make sure we get his questions addressed. But is there anyone else that has a final question? You can raise your hand, throw it in the chat. If not, I'm not seeing anything. Commissioner Buck, I will turn it over to you for any final words tonight. Thank you.
I just want to thank everybody for coming this evening and getting your questions answered, hopefully. And if you didn't, and we need to follow up, we will do that. Feel free, again, to email us. You can contact me anytime, 541-682-4203. And you can email me as well, heather.buck@lanecountyor.gov. And I will be there to continue to field questions and answers through the various departments as much as I can. Remember that if you want to revisit the question and you want to hear it again, we will put this video on the update section in our McKinsey Rebuilds website, so that if you need to come back and check something, you can. I do want to say I'm very impressed with our 85-year-old that was able to call in and navigate this virtual atmosphere to ask the questions he needed. I so appreciate everybody being willing to do that. It's not something that you normally do on your evening time period, that we really want to be able to continue doing these question and answer sessions as long as it is needed. And I anticipate that to be quite some time as people continue to rebuild throughout the summer. Feel free again to contact us if there are any further questions, and we'll see you at the next Holiday Farm Fire update. Thank you.